Hello, I'm Alison Colley from Real Employment Law Advice, and this is a rerun of a presentation at a webinar that myself and my colleague Albert Bargery gave on Wednesday the 20th of May. It's an introduction to the basics of redundancy, which hopefully you'll find helpful. In this video, I'm going to be covering collective consultation and the general consultation, but I'll also do a shorter video for those people who are doing a redundancy which involves less than 20 people, which I'll explain more shortly. So if your redundancy process is involving less than 20 people, then you might want to have a look at the other video, which is a bit shorter, or you can stick with this one because there are lots of hints and tips in this as well. Before I get started, just a little bit about my firm. I run the firm Real Employment Law Advice. I'm a solicitor and HR specialist. We specialise in employment law and HR, and this is my team here. We're all about improving the world of work for all. That's the mission of the firm, and we do that by providing advice and assistance to both employers and employees on all aspects of employment law. In addition to providing advice and assistance, we also provide lots of free content for both employers and employees. Obviously, you're watching this video, so you found us on YouTube or on one of our social media channels. We also do have a fortnightly newsletter where we send out lots of free content, and the Employment Law and HR podcast, which I host, which is fortnightly, which you can find on iTunes, Spotify, or on our website, which is Advice for Employers, and various other podcasting hosts. So what I'm going to be covering in this video is a brief rundown on the redundancy procedure, what collective consultation is and when it applies, and additional steps that may be required. Some additional requirements to consult during the current situation with regards to social distancing and remote working. This is obviously being recorded during the current COVID-19 situation where many businesses are either closed or have their employees working at a distance. My top tips on making the process stress-free. So I'm going to get first into step one, which is planning. Now, when it comes to planning, it's important to take some time to really look at this and consider what you're trying to achieve with the redundancy consultation and where you want the business to be. It is all about business reasons and looking at that rather than looking at individuals. So the starting point is, what do you want to achieve? So consider and record your business planning and your reasons for the decision. So model and plan out what the workforce is going to look like. Clearly, in the current situation we're in, it's difficult to know what's going to happen. For many businesses, you're unclear about when you're going to be opening and returning to work anyway, let alone whether there's going to be customers and how that's going to look. So it is important to do a number of modelling and projections here. So keep cash flow and projections in mind, model a number of scenarios as to what kind of volume of staff you'll need. And what will be the short-term cost of the reductions versus the long-term savings? So it's always good to look at what it's going to cost you in terms of redundancy and how long it's going to take you to get the repayment on that. And now is time to consider exactly what you're trying to achieve with the business and with the redundancy or restructuring plan. The planning stage is the time to focus on the business reasons and not on individuals, as I say. This will really help you both in terms of getting the success that you want with the business, but also preventing any issues with staff later on. With regards to the current COVID-19 situation, there is some additional planning that I would recommend over and above that, which you would normally do in a redundancy situation. And that is to see, is this the right time? Is this the right time to be undertaking a redundancy consultation? Will it be unfair to dismiss for redundancy when you have the furlough scheme? So looking at it, there is an argument that potentially it would be unfair, or there's an additional level of reasonableness required from an employer to basically justify a decision to make someone redundant when you have the furlough scheme available. Not only is there the legal risk, but you've also got to consider the potential reputational risks and issues that come with making people redundant when you have the furlough scheme available. Obviously, it's very public, everybody knows about it. Lots of the complaints that I've heard from those individuals who have been made redundant during this time is they feel very aggrieved that their employer's gone ahead with the redundancy when the furlough scheme's there. And in their mind, they think, well, it's not costing my employer anything to furlough me. They might as well carry on with that and then look at things again later on. So do keep that in mind when you're planning. Of course, as we said earlier, there's a very unknown future. We don't really know what's going to be happening in relation to how business is going to look and how people are going to want to respond after the sort of harsher elements of the lockdown have ended and as we kind of ease out of that. There's also the balance between the business viability and cost saving, and also ensuring that you have the skills and experience and the manpower to operate in the future. And this is where I say the planning is important, because you don't really want to rush into things and start making decisions that could have a detrimental impact on your business in the future. So let's just say you do end up getting back to full speed within a couple of months. Are you then going to be at the situation where you've got a skills shortage? Don't forget, as I say, there are many businesses did have a skills shortage before the COVID situation and were struggling to recruit. So do keep that in mind. There is, as I say, a real balance between making sure the business is viable, but also ensuring you have the right amount of people with the right skills going forward. And then, of course, there's the costs of redundancy and then subsequently recruitment if you have to do that. Finally, on planning, once you've done the business side of it, the business case, considered the COVID situation, the furlough scheme, and then you need to look at exactly what are your projected numbers of employees who are going to be at risk, what are the projected numbers of employees you're proposing to make redundant. Do you have a recognised trade union? If you have a recognised trade union, then now's the time to start talking to them and dealing with them and planning ahead with the union. Do you have employee representatives in place? So if you don't have a recognised trade union, do you have employee reps? And who is going to be responsible within the organisation for running and managing the redundancy process? Who's the person that's going to ultimately be making the decisions and dealing with this on a day-to-day basis? And then finally, do you have the necessary in-house experience and training to manage the process effectively? And if not, will you need to seek some external advice and support? It's really important to make sure that you get the process right and that you have the right skills and experience to deal with it in the most appropriate way. Step 2, is there a genuine redundancy situation? Now, ordinarily when it comes to making redundancies, there would be quite a bit of focus on this to decide actually if it is a genuine redundancy situation. But in the current situation we're in, most situations will fit into one of these. So in order to be a genuine redundancy situation, there has to be a closure of a business for which the employee was employed. If there's a closure of the place of business where the employee was employed to work, or there's a reduced requirement for employees to carry out work of a particular kind. So that's the legal test for establishing if it is a redundancy situation. Step 3, considering whether collective consultation will apply. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, and that is to say that there will be another shorter video just skipping over some of the collective consultation steps that are required. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be going into the full process that's required in relation to collective consultation. So if you are proposing to dismiss 20 or more employees at one establishment within a 90-day period, then the collective consultation rules will apply. And that's the minimum legal requirements in terms of how you deal with a redundancy situation. As I say there, for the purposes of calculating the numbers, you should ensure that you include any voluntary redundancies that may have taken place or may take place, employees who are redeployed, any zero-hour employees whom you've let go because of lack of work, and any employees who have less than 2 years employment with you, whose employment has ended because there's no work available for them. So whilst they may not have the right to claim a redundancy payment, they do still fall into the numbers for the purposes of calculating whether you have to deal with collective consultation or not. Step 4. Now, the election of employee representatives is a requirement if you are making more than 20 employees redundant. And it is a step that you have to take, a legal requirement if you don't already have them. But if you're just undertaking a normal consultation, redundancy consultation, without having 20 or more, then it's still a good idea, should I say, to consider this as one of the steps in your process. It can make things a lot easier to have employee representatives in place to liaise between management and staff. So as I say there, if there's no recognised trade union and you have no existing employee representatives, then you are required for the purposes of collective consultation to set up elections for employee representatives. And as I was saying before, it can be helpful even if they're not legally required. There is a minimum legal election process to follow, which I'm not going to go into in this presentation, but I will be covering in the podcast in detail, and so that will be coming up shortly. If you're listening to this or watching this video in the future, then have a search on the Employment Law and HR podcast and you'll find the episode there in the mini-series on redundancy. Step 5, a notification to the Secretary of State where you're making collective redundancies. Now this is a legal requirement, again, just to emphasise, where you're making 20 or more redundancies within a 90-day period. You're required to complete the form HR1, which you'll find online on the .gov website, and you're required to complete that and submit the information on that form, and then to supply a copy to employee representatives or the trade union if you have one recognised. Failure to notify is a criminal offence with summary conviction and a fine of up to £5,000. So it's really important that you do this step. And one thing I would say is if you are looking at making redundancies and you think potentially your numbers could be tipping into 20 or more, or at some point in the near future you might be making more redundancies, it's definitely worth going through the collective consultation process anyway. You won't be criticised for doing it should you not have required to, but you definitely will find yourself in difficulty if you haven't, and it's very hard to backtrack and go back over it. In terms of timing, you're required to notify if you have 20 to 99 redundancies proposed at least 30 days before the first dismissal takes place, and 100 or more it's at least 45 days. So again, this is where your planning comes in, right back to the beginning. What are the numbers you're going to be looking at, and what's your timescale for completion? And if you're looking to try to deal with the redundancies and get everything finished, notice given, and potentially people leaving before the end of the furlough scheme, or to tie in with the end of the furlough scheme, it's important to start looking and tracking back on the timings now. As I said there, if you're in any doubt about whether it applies, certainly you should get some specific advice to your business, but if you are in doubt, then you should consider using the form and notifying anyway. Step 6, the pools for selection and selection criteria. Now, this is where you decide on which parts of the business or which parts of the workforce you're going to be reducing. And if, for example, you're reducing a particular sector in number, say by 50%, then you look at which employees you put into the pool or which roles you put into the pool and how you're going to select which employees are made redundant. Now, clearly, if you're getting rid of a whole department or a whole area of the business, and then there are no remaining jobs, or there aren't any need for any pools for selection, then you may not need to do this step. But it's important to start thinking about it and making sure that you've got this right. So again, it's back to the planning, focusing on what you're trying to achieve with the process. You're trying to avoid unfairness and bias by focusing on job roles and business requirements. And where possible, consultants seek views from employee representatives in relation to the pools and the criteria you're using. It's important to remember that you have obligations under the Equality Act in relation to discrimination, and again, if you're unsure, it's important to get advice. Some questions to consider when you're looking at the pools and the criteria that you're going to use is: what are the job roles that you need to fulfill? What skills and experience do you need? What are the hours of work and cover? What are your budgets, and where do you need to make cuts and changes? So you can shape your questions to fit around the skills and experience that you need in the future, and look at where you're going to find those employees from to fulfill the work going forward. Step 7, a list of alternative job vacancies. So this is where you're required to look and see if there are any vacancies in your organisation or across the group. You need to list those vacancies and make sure that they're available for the employee representatives and individual employees that you're consulting with. You need to keep in mind that there are special rules that apply to those employees who are on maternity, adoption or shared parental leave, where they may have a priority for any vacancies that you have available. Continually refresh and review your list and make sure that the list of alternative vacancies is up to date. Step 8, communication with representatives. There's a requirement under the Collective Consultation rules to provide representatives with written information about the proposals, and this is to ensure that you have a meaningful consultation with them so that they're aware of exactly what's happening. They've got all of the information, they're fully informed, and you can have a real meaningful consultation and discussion. Do be open and honest with them and with employees. And as I say there, it's not required if you have 19 or less redundancies, but it's advisable to ensure that you provide that information to individuals at the consultation stage so that they're fully informed of what's happening. There you will see the list of the 9 things as a minimum you should provide to the representatives, and as I say, I would recommend you include these in the individuals as well. Step 9 is the first meeting. Now, you will have seen that I've obviously got to step 9 here, and you might think, well, actually, Alison, that's quite a lot of work to be doing, and it's going to take me quite a lot of time. Well, lots of these steps can run along the same side as each other, so you're doing it all at the same time. You're not sort of doing step 1, finish that, step 2, finish that. You can run along the same side so that you're keeping your consultation process moving, and the consultation is, as I say, meaningful and going at the pace at which you want it to, whilst also ensuring that employees have all the information that they need. The first meeting is with employees collectively or the representatives in the trade union, depending on whether it's a collective consultation or not. Given the way we're working currently and social distancing, you might want to consider utilising video conferencing, so Zoom, Teams or Skype or anything else like that, that you can have those meetings. And if necessary, if it's hard to get people together for whatever reason, then hold more than one meeting. Of course, noting that if people are working from home, so representatives are working from home or employees are working at home, it may be difficult for them to have a conversation where they can either be confidential or have a dedicated time to listen if they're at home, perhaps with other people in the house, with children, that sort of thing. So that's where I say you may need to have more than one meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to explain the process to the affected employees. It needs to be full, honest and open in your communication, and then I would recommend that you follow up with a letter, again confirming the details about what's been discussed. Step 10, the consultation period and follow-up discussions. So the consultation period that we're talking about here is the period of time between providing the employees or the employee representatives with the information about what you're proposing and then starting the individual consultation meeting, so starting to make those decisions. Now, we're referred to a minimum period of time for collective consultation of 30 and 45 days. It's often misunderstood by people, should I say, that you have to have a full consultation period for the 30 or 45 days. And that's not necessarily the case. It's just that you can't undertake the first dismissal for 30 or 45 days. The consultation period, as I'm talking about here, is the actual period of time where you're in discussions, you're going through the process, you're trying to avoid redundancies, you're trying to find ways of working, ways of getting the pools right, that kind of thing. So the consultation period doesn't actually have to be for the full 30 days, but it's important that you keep an open mind really about the process and what you're doing, and make sure that those dialogues continue so that you can justify your decision making later on if you need to in terms of how you've dealt with the consultation. So during the consultation period, you need to ensure that, as I say, you maintain regular communication with reps and the trade union. Consider setting up an email address or some other method of collating employee responses and feedback. If you can set up an anonymous method of feedback, that's a really good idea, especially if you don't have employee representatives to feedback from staff. Follow up on any suggestions and ensure that you keep an open mind. So don't go into it thinking, well, this is exactly how things are going to end up. There's no point in this consultation. It's just, a process. It's really important. Your employees may have ideas that you hadn't thought of. They are the ones who work on the ground. They may be able to give you ideas that you really didn't know, or that might help to resolve issues or to save jobs. So do listen to them. It's important at this stage. And then, as I say, hold any follow-up meetings with representatives and consider a follow-up group meeting, either via video call if you're social distancing and you can't meet in person. Step 11, the scoring and selection. So this is the stage at which you start going through your selection criteria, if you have one, or how you're going to score employees to decide who is made redundant. And this is where you start at the end of the sort of consultation period, where your consultation period is starting to reach a conclusion. You get into the process of scoring employees and deciding who is tentatively at risk. Where possible, at least 2 managers or supervisors should complete the scoring, and I recommend you involve HR for an objective view. One of the main issues of contention, where the gripes come from and where people end up bringing employment tribunal claims, in my experience, is where the scoring has been unfair, or they have used criteria which cannot be backed up or evidenced. So employees become very aggrieved that they're the ones who have actually been selected. So it's important to make sure that your scoring process is transparent, and where possible you use evidence to support your scoring. Step 12 is the individual consultation. So once you have reached the end or towards the end of the collective consultation stage, and then you've started the scoring, you can then invite the individuals who are at risk of redundancy to a meeting to discuss their provisional selection for redundancy. So assuming nothing has changed as a result of the scoring and the consultation, you can start the individual discussions. You would invite them to a meeting, and this could be by video call or in person with social distancing. You can ask them to bring a trade union rep or a colleague to the meeting, and given again the way we are working currently, you might want to suggest that they bring a family member or friend, or offer for them to bring a family member or friend if it's easier. Someone from their same household obviously will then reduce the need for the social distancing. You need to give them full details about the redundancy, the process, and the fact that they have been provisionally selected and how, and then tell them at this stage that no final decision has been made. You're yet to make a final decision, and this is just part of the process. It's a time to talk through the reasons with them, listen to what they have to say, take any notes from the meeting of what they say, and then follow up with them in writing. So take any actions. For example, if the employee challenges some of the selection criteria or scoring at that stage, you might want to go back to whoever scored it and review the reasons and the details that have been provided. Step 13 is the second individual meeting. So this is where you meet again with the employee who's been provisionally selected for redundancy, and you decide on the final decision in relation to their redundancy. So assuming nothing's changed after the first meeting and you've done your follow-ups, if there's no need for a further first meeting, if you like, then you'd have the second individual meeting again, where this time you would confirm their selection and the reasons, and you'd explain to them the redundancy package and that their employment is going to be terminated by reason of redundancy. Now's a good time to explain to them the next steps from a practical perspective. So are they required to work their notice? When will their employment end? And what happens about the furlough? Step 12 is the dismissal letter, and this follows the second meeting with the individual where their redundancy is confirmed. Again, the dismissal letter just confirms all of the information, so you're reiterating, again recapping the reasons why you've reached the decision to make redundancies, the process you've followed and how you've reached this point. It's important to set out their redundancy pay, details of their notice and any other payments or benefits, what will happen about their accrued holiday and any other practicalities. You should also ensure that the dismissal letter sets out how they can appeal and who they need to send it to and within what time scale. Step 13 is an appeal if the employee were to appeal, and the key thing here is to make sure that where possible somebody who hasn't already been involved in the redundancy decision making process deals with the appeal. So finally, I'm just going to wrap up with my top tips for a successful redundancy process, and this can be whether you're doing a collective consultation or just the sort of individual straightforward shorter consultation where there's less than 20 employees. So my top tips are, again, going back to what I was saying at the very beginning, you need to consider your timing very carefully. How does the consultation and proposed redundancies fit within the furlough scheme, the timing, the potential reputational risks and issues, and how you're going to deal with this? How are you going to deal with the messaging if you're contacted by your local media, for example, to ask why you're doing a redundancy? How are you going to deal with that? Take a conservative approach when you're deciding whether to collectively consult or not. So this is where I was saying, if you think you might end up tipping into the 20 or more at some point, then it's worth taking the conservative approach and starting off from the collective consultation process. Focus on the business reasons at all times and what you want to achieve. Avoid thinking about individual personalities when you're shaping your pools and your selection criteria. Consultation does not have to be in person or face-to-face, and yes, you can use things like Zoom or Skype or Teams to have a video call, but I don't think anything beats having that face-to-face contact. Now, if you can hold a meeting with an individual within a room that's big enough so that you can socially distance and you can take the steps to preserve health and safety and prevent any infection, then it is a good idea to try to have those meetings in person. It's a really nice way to ensure having that contact with them at a really stressful time for everyone. Consultation must be meaningful and genuine. And of course, don't forget those employees who are left behind. So those employees who have been at part of the redundancy process or haven't, but are still with colleagues who have, and who are left behind, making sure that you're ensuring their well-being and welfare and stress levels are dealt with appropriately. Plan for positivity. So look at it and try to be positive about the process. It is a stressful time for everyone. So try to look at it from a positive perspective. And then be mindful of your own self-care if you're managing a redundancy process. As I say, it's very stressful, it can be very negative, and it can be quite hard to deliver those messages at a really difficult time. So make sure you keep that in mind yourself and plan and have someone to talk to if you're dealing with the process. And then finally, communication is absolutely the key when it comes to dealing with employees and redundancy processes, to make sure that everything is dealt with fairly, reasonably, and people feel like they've been heard. So that was a rundown of the redundancy process in terms of the collective consultation. It is a very quick overview of the process, of the steps that's required, which will hopefully get you started. If you do have any questions or you would like any further information, or you feel that you can't handle the process yourself and you'd like us to do it for you, then you can get in touch with us. There's our details there on the screen, both our emails and telephone numbers if you want to get in touch. If you're planning on doing the process yourself and you are not sure about the paperwork, or you just want to have something to refer to, you want some template letters that you can just fill in and make sure you're doing everything right in the steps that's required, then you can download and purchase our DIY toolkit online, and it's on the website adviceforemployers.co.uk/DIY-documents. You'll see it there. It's £100 plus VAT, and included within that is a step-by-step guide in much the same way as we've just gone through, but a bit more detail. There's a timetable that you can use and fill in yourself, and all the documents that you may need in order to elect employee representatives, to deal with letters for redundancy, dismissal, and an example redundancy selection criteria. All in all, there are around 15 documents in there for £100 plus VAT that you can then use yourself. So hopefully give you some help in navigating the process at a very low cost. And then just finally, before I sign off on this video, as I said at the beginning, the purpose of Real Employment Law Advice and our goals are to improve the world of work for all. And the way we do that is, we think providing information and resources about best practice is a great way of getting that out to employers. And we do this by our fortnightly newsletter, which you can receive by email. You can either sign up online on the website adviceforemployers.co.uk, or you can drop me an email. My email is alison@realemploymentlawsadvice.co.uk, and I'll put you on the mailing list. We have a number of articles on our websites, on LinkedIn if you want to connect with myself, Albert or Miranda. It's Albert Bardry and Miranda Amos on LinkedIn. We're always sharing lots of information there. There's the fortnightly podcast, which is in May, is currently in the middle of a redundancy mini-series, so covering all of these points in a bit more detail. And of course, there's a YouTube channel, webinars, live webinars that we're hosting, and on social media. So lots of resources available for you. If you do want any information, don't hesitate to get in touch. We're happy to help you in any way we can. Where possible, we can agree a fixed fee with you, so you're certain about costs, because we understand that given the current situation, and if you are contemplating redundancies, then costs may be at the forefront of your mind. So don't hesitate to give us a call, and thank you very much for watching this webinar. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, please do leave them below. And of course, if you subscribe to our channel, then you'll get notification when our next videos are available. Many thanks.